Now dim, the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a high stone rampart. It's not grand or golden, just gray and wind-bitten, perched above a muddy hilltop fort. The sky is bruised purple with dawn. The cold slips through the cracks in your boots. And somewhere below, a goat bleats like it's seen your future and isn't impressed. Perched on the battlement beside you is a raven, not in a cage, not on a string. Just sitting there, waiting. Next to the bird stands a knight, or perhaps a retired one, wearing a mismatched cloak with hands calloused and warm. He holds out a strip of parchment tied with red thread. Gently, like he's offering a treat to a dog, he fastens the message to the raven's leg. No fanfare, no horn blast, just a soft murmur, to Viken if you please. And the raven flies, not in panic or confusion, but with eerie certainty, like it knows precisely where Viken is. Like it's done this before. You watch until it becomes a black dot against the sunrise and then disappears into cloud. Back then, the use of birds, especially ravens, for military communication wasn't exactly standard practice. Pigeons had better PR, but ravens, oh, they had flair, intelligence, a sense of drama. Some medieval commanders swore by them, convinced that ravens once trained were harder to intercept and less likely to fly into the nearest bakery mid-mission. Slightly less likely. And why here, in this sleepy hill fort, surrounded by little more than sheep peat smoke and the occasional suspicious stew? Because this is where it began, a forgotten lord, a forgotten campaign, and an unexpected idea. Here's your historical fact. While carrier pigeons are well-documented, ravens were also selectively used in parts of medieval Scandinavia and Britain for battlefield communication. They were known for their loyalty to home roosts, making them natural return couriers, if less predictable than their gray-feathered cousins. The Raven program, if you can call it that, wasn't exactly funded. There was no royal decree, just a handful of outposts, a few eccentric commanders, and a whole lot of trial and error. Oh, the errors. There was the time 3 ravens were dispatched to 3 different outposts, and all 3 returned to the cookhouse, having developed a fondness for barley porridge. There was the knight who claimed he could teach his raven to recognize enemy banners. It pecked them instead. Strategic maybe. Subtle. Not so much. But what drew people in wasn't just utility, it was myth. The raven you see was already tangled in legend. Norse tradition saw them as divine messengers. Celtic lore saw them as omens of war. In medieval minds, they sat halfway between the sacred and the shadowy. Not quite holy, not quite evil, just clever, mysterious, useful, in a slightly unsettling way. That made them perfect for this job. Because if you wanted to send a message without anyone intercepting it, well, let's face it, no one in their right mind would try to grab a raven mid-flight. Those beaks were not decorative, and if you did happen to spot a raven circling your keep, you couldn't be sure what it meant. Maybe death, maybe dinner, maybe your neighbor was gossiping about you again via bird. Let's add in a quirky side detail here. In one border region, it became popular to dress ravens with small colored sashes, red for peace, messages, black for war warnings, and green if someone was out of cheese and getting desperate. That last one might be apocryphal, but the chronicles do mention at least one raven landing in a pantry. So here you are, standing in the wind, as the raven disappears beyond the treetops, and the knight turns to you, not with pride, but a hint of a smirk. Works better than a squire, he says, and doesn't eat all the apples. You nod, still wondering how this raven knows its destination. The knight shrugs. They always come back, unless someone cooks sausages on the road. And just like that, you've stepped into a world where mail wears feathers and secrets ride the sky. Now sleep gently with that thought. Somewhere in medieval history, a military strategy depended entirely on whether or not a raven got distracted by roadkill. Oh, and if you think modern texting has delivery issues, just imagine depending on a bird who might stop to chat with another bird halfway through the message. Sweet dreams. Crows and the art of war. You're not in the bustling capital tonight. No palace gardens or echoing cathedrals. Just a damp hilltop somewhere between what your map calls the borderlands and what locals call nowhere good. The sun hasn't risen yet, but someone has already lit the forge. And beside the forge, pacing like a man preparing for battle or a picnic, it's hard to tell, is a figure in a patchwork tunic made of chainmail and wool. Meet Sir Haldrick, former knight, current bird trainer. Yes, that's the official title on the crude wooden sign hanging over his shed. Haldrick of the Feathers, Raven Drill Master Rhett. He doesn't look retired. In fact, he looks more intense than most active commanders. You see it in the way he talks to the raven perched on his shoulder. Not baby talk, not cooing, but short commands clipped and clear. Military. This is not a pet. This is a recruit. Left perch, right glide. Show me spine, soldier. The raven cocks its head, then as if on cue, swoops across the yard, touches a small brass bell with its claw, and glides back to the top of a wooden pole, landing with the elegance of someone who's done this 1,000 times and still doesn't care what you think. Haldrick nods. Better than my old squire. That one couldn't find his own boots. It's a strange little operation, this camp. You count 4 ravens each in its own perch tower, with lines of yarn and bells stretching between them like a bird-sized obstacle course. A faded battle flag flutters overhead, not of any kingdom you recognize. Maybe it's Haldrick's own invention. Maybe it's just a bedsheet he found inspiring. He explains, without prompting, ravens don't betray. They don't take bribes. They don't gossip in the alehouse or fall asleep in council meetings. They just fly. Apparently, that was the beginning of his shift in tactics. After too many betrayals, too many leaks, too many supposed secure messengers turning out to be anything but Haldrick turned to birds. You're not sure what's more surprising, that it worked, or that he managed to convince a few other commanders to try it. He pulls out a parchment, yellowed creased, and marked with tiny scribbled maps. Routes, feeding points, possible intercept locations. This is bird logistics medieval style, your historical fact for tonight. While no widespread raven corps ever formed, there is evidence that some border commanders used birds, notably ravens and rooks, in specialized roles, especially where human runners were too slow or too talkative. These trials were usually limited experimental and often operated without official sanction, which seems very on brand for Haldrick. And here comes the quirky detail. Haldrick developed what he called tactical scent. Training, rubbing raven perches with rosemary sage, or even a bit of goose fat to teach them to identify safe landing spots by smell. Not all ravens cooperated. One, he says, simply flew to the baker's chimney every time and refused further employment. Today's lesson: coordinated release. He unties the leather strap from one raven's leg and tosses a small round fruit into the air. The bird catches it mid-flight, clearly part of the routine, and then veers sharply east disappearing behind the ridge. That's to the outpost. If he gets distracted by the orchard again, I'll know. You wonder how he tracks this. Haldrick smiles, holds up a brass compass with a tiny raven carved into the lid. It doesn't track direction. It just makes him feel better. Battles are chaos, he says, now serious. But birds, they're simple. You give them trust food and a reason to return. People? He shrugs. Harder. A pause. Then a deadpan glance your way. Though admittedly, birds are worse at swordplay. And there it is, the first of several dry jabs that seem to be Haldrick's only remaining form of joy. He tells you how one of his ravens once dropped a message directly into a barrel of pickled cabbage. The recipient still read it. Through brine. That's commitment. Another story, a raven intercepted midair by an angry goose. The two spiraled for 5 minutes before both gave up and landed confused but alive. Message undelivered. Goose sabotage, he calls it. Unforgivable. By now, the forge glows gently, though it's mostly just keeping tea warm. The ravens preen. One lets out a slow, lazy croak and settles into a puffball of feathers' eyes, half closed like a soldier off duty. You realize something else: these ravens aren't just tools. Haldrick genuinely respects them. Maybe even likes them more than people, which, given the state of medieval politics, isn't unreasonable. He leans against a post, sips from a tin cup, and mutters, "No birds ever lied to my face." You nod politely, trying to decide whether that's inspiring or a little sad. Still, you feel it, the quiet dignity of this place. The wind, the birds, the bells. A man who saw too much war and found peace in feathers. And honestly, you're starting to believe him. Maybe ravens really are better messengers. Maybe they always were. Or maybe Haldrick just finally found colleagues who don't talk back. Sleep now, with the sound of a tiny bell chiming as another message takes flight into the mist. 3 medieval jokes to leave with. What's a raven's favorite royal decree? Constitutional monarchy. Why didn't the knight trust his squire because the raven never borrowed his armor? A raven walks into a tavern. The bartender says, "Why the long wings?" The raven replies, "I'm just here to deliver emotional baggage." Sending messages on feathered wings. You're in a cloister courtyard now, the kind that smells faintly of wax-damp stone and unanswered prayers. The morning fog hasn't quite lifted, and dew clings to the ivy like gossip to a medieval marketplace. Somewhere a bell tolls softly, not quite a summons, more like a sigh. A monk stands near a tall post, robed in brown, with sleeves slightly too long. He's holding a small scroll in one hand and a rather unimpressed raven in the other. The bird stares at you. You stare back. You lose. Its eyes are the color of ink and judgment. The monk brother Reynold is mid-sentence before you even introduce yourself. It's not about obedience, it's about trust and snacks. You assume he means the raven. At least you hope so. He gently ties the scroll to the bird's leg with a practiced loop, muttering a short blessing. The message is short, he says. Not because space is limited, though it is, but because ravens aren't known for delivering long novels. Keep it short. Keep it essential. Preferably not slanderous. This one is headed to St. Elric's watchtower, Reynolds says, pointing toward the distant hills. If it doesn't get distracted by squirrels, the raven lets out a low croak as if offended by the mere suggestion. And here's your historical fact. Though pigeons were the most documented medieval messenger birds, Some monastic and military communities experimented with ravens due to their strong homing instincts and adaptability. Unlike pigeons, ravens could be trained to navigate more flexible paths, return to specific handlers, and even recognize basic visual cues. Ravens were a sort of high-risk, high-reward postal service. Less predictable than pigeons, yes, but smarter, and much harder to catch, which was rather useful when your enemies were as interested in your mail as you were. Brother Reynold waves his hand gently, and the raven hops to the perch. He pauses. Then with a little huff, yes, the bird huffs, it lifts off. You tilt your head back, following the black speck as it weaves between towers, climbs above the tree line, and vanishes. See, the monk says proud. Didn't even need the apple slice this time. You learn that this cloister has maintained a raven post for over a decade. They use it not just for messages between outposts and other abbeys, but for collecting herbs, documenting storm damage, and once accidentally delivering a love poem to the wrong recipient. We never did get Brother Alwyn's dignity back, Reynolds says with a wistful grin. The quirky detail tonight. Each raven here has its own carved perch and symbolic name assigned during a tiny ritual that involves ringing a silver bell and offering 3 grapes. Why 3? No one remembers. But it's tradition. And traditions don't need logic, especially not medieval ones. Some of the names are expected Valor Shadow Whisper. Others are less so. You spot a perch labeled Sir Pex-a-Lot. That raven Reynolds says has attitude. You ask how the ravens know where to go. Reynolds explains with a sparkle in his eye that the birds are trained using a mix of scent food trails, landmarks, and consistent caretakers. They return not to a place, but to a person. A bond. They come back to those who feed them, speak kindly, and wear the same gloves every day. You blink. The gloves matter, of course, he says, as if you'd just asked whether water is wet. Then comes the academic debate. Were these birds really trained? Or did monks just assume they were smarter than they were? Some historians argue that medieval raven post was less reliable than records suggest, possibly exaggerated by chroniclers who wanted to impress donors. Others point to archaeological finds and scratched abbey ledgers that mention raven roots feeding logs and performance notes. Like Swift today. Delivered in 13 minutes. Good raven. You imagine the bird reading that review like a smug employee of the month. Brother Reynolds lets you peek into the training shed. It's filled with tiny brass bells, feather brushes, and miniature satchels. Also, inexplicably, a jar labeled emergency raisins. You don't ask. He offers you a chance to send your own message. You scribble something vaguely poetic, mostly about the weather and the mysterious absence of clean socks. He smiles, rolls it up, and calls over another raven named Quill. Quill looks at you, looks at Reynolds, and then at your message, as if to say, "This is barely worth my time." Still, he accepts it. Off he goes, up and gone. Where's that one going, you ask? Reynolds shrugs. We'll find out if someone writes back. Maybe not the most secure system, but undeniably charming. You leave the cloister with a strange sense of connection, not just to the people, but to the birds. Creatures of habit intelligence, and just enough mischief to keep things interesting. Sleep now, knowing that in a world of nights and sieges, sometimes the most reliable messenger wore feathers, and occasionally demanded grapes. And remember, never insult a raven's intelligence, they'll hold a grudge. Always double-check your message before sending, especially if it contains poetry. Emergency raisins are a surprisingly effective negotiation tactic. Signals from above. You're walking through a quiet meadow, just beyond the edge of a walled village. The morning is oddly still. No market chatter, no hammering from the smithy, not even a barking dog. Just wind through the grass, and something faint in the distance, like wings slicing the air. And then you see it. A single raven, circling low banking, sharply to the left, as if unsure. Its feathers glint faintly in the sun, and clutched in one claw, just barely visible, is a ribbon of parchment. But here's the strange part: it turns back. It doesn't continue toward the watchtower. It loops once, then twice, then dives straight back to the outpost it came from. The messenger has returned. A young sentry on the wall spots it and bolts down the ladder breathless. "It came back!" he shouts. It turned around. Moments later, a captain is summoned. The gate is closed, and bells are rung, not the celebratory kind, but the sharp, jolting clang of alarm. Something's happened. That raven just saved a village. Here's your historical fact. In certain border regions, ravens were trained not just to deliver messages, but to return prematurely if something interrupted their route: smoke, sudden noise, or injury. Medieval handlers called this a shadow loop, and it became a primitive yet effective early warning system. Think of it as the feathered version of a motion sensor. If the bird came back too soon, something was wrong. Tonight's peculiar detail. Some posts even developed a symbolic code. Ravens dyed with a dab of natural blue pigment were assigned to food supplies. Red-tinted ravens were used in times of war. The dye wore off in a few days, but the image of a red-winged raven returning early was enough to cause panic, or at least a lot of awkward council meetings. You return to the tower, where the captain is now unfolding the returned message. It's damp, slightly crumpled, but intact. It reads simply, "All quiet. Confirm at dusk." He frowns. If they sent all quiet, why is the bird back now? A beat. Then someone mutters, "Unless it wasn't quiet for long." Suddenly, you feel the strange awareness that sometimes information doesn't arrive in what's written, but in how it arrives or doesn't. You're invited to observe the raven loft. There's a row of wooden frames, each with a small perch, a label, and a sack of dried berries beside it. One is empty, marked Rook 4, the bird that just returned. On the wall behind it, there's a chalkboard filled with notes like, "Returned in 8 min, no wind, did not return, assumed caught or fat, turned at ridge, check terrain." It's clear someone here takes these birds seriously, maybe more seriously than some knights take their swords. The master handler, a woman named Elsweith, is already prepping another bird. She doesn't look particularly impressed by your presence. She's more focused on adjusting the strap of a tiny leather scroll case. "This one's faster," she says, not looking up. "And smarter. Doesn't like music, though." She says this as if it's a measurable trait. Before sending it out, she murmurs something to the bird, soft, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. "He likes routine," she says. "Spooks less." You're beginning to realize that medieval raven handling wasn't just functional, it was strangely intimate. This wasn't owning an animal. This was partnership, with boundaries, and a bit of emotional blackmail. The second raven lifts off and shoots over the tree line with a speed that startles you. A few villagers gather below, watching silently. Children shield their eyes from the sun pointing. It feels like waiting for a message from the gods. And now comes the scholarly debate. Were ravens responding to real cues? Or were handlers projecting patterns onto random bird behavior. Some medieval scholars claimed the birds had second sight. Others believed ravens were simply creatures of intense habit. If trained well, they reacted consistently to specific triggers. Either way, the results mattered more than the reasons. And you're just trying to remember if you saw the bird hesitate before it turned around. That kind of detail keeps you awake longer than it should. By nightfall, the raven hasn't returned. Elsweith doesn't panic. She scribbles a note, calmly selects a third bird, and prepares another message. You ask if she's worried. She shrugs. The bird's fine. It's the people I'm concerned about. Another whisper of wind. Another black silhouette vanishing into the dark. Sleep now. Knowing that in a time without satellites or sirens, a single turn of wing might mean the difference between calm and chaos. And tonight's soft absurdities. Medieval ravens may have been better at reverse delivery than most modern couriers. Turned at ridge could mean danger, or a really nice trash pile. Elsweith probably trusts her birds more than she'd trust you with a butter knife. The off-the-books aviary. You're in the woods now. Not the dark fairy tale kind, but the tangled brambly type that catches your cloak every 2 steps and smells like pine needles and conspiracy. There's no signpost, no proper path. Just footprints in the mud and a faint trail of feathers. Someone coughs ahead. Then a whisper. You didn't see this place from the road. Got it. You nod, mostly because your boots are already wet and you're too tired to argue. And that's how you find it, a raven training ground not listed on any map, tucked behind a crumbling monastery ruin, operated by someone who answers only to Magister Vey. He's not exactly the textbook image of a medieval tactician. He's wearing half a gambus in one riding glove and has an entire sprig of parsley stuck in his beard. Whether it's intentional is unclear, but his ravens, they're immaculate. Sharp-eyed, lean, and unsettlingly quiet. No caws, no flapping, just stares. Lots of stares. This, he says, gesturing with theatrical flair, is not a zoo. It's a silent corps, trained for discretion, memory, and message resistance. Message resistance, yes, he nods solemnly. In case they're captured and interrogated. You blink. He doesn't elaborate. This place isn't like the cozy monastery loft or the disciplined military towers. It's improvised, half-hidden, and feels off-grid. Vey shows you the training structures, crude perches shaped like tree limbs, targets painted with noble crests, even a wooden dummy holding a tiny scroll. You watch as one raven launches, dodges 2 obstacles, grabs the scroll from the dummy, and lands without fanfare. That's a new recruit, Vey says. We call him Toothpick. You do not ask why. Tonight's historical fact. While most raven messaging was semi-formal or religious in nature, certain border outposts and rogue groups developed their own informal networks. These included mercenaries, scouts, and yes, the occasional disgraced knight turned bird handler. These unregistered raven camps rarely made the records, but some fragments survive in journal entries and marginalia notes like bird, sent not sure if bribed, or returned with wrong scroll again. And here's your oddity of the evening. Vey claims he once trained a raven to retrieve colored cloth instead of delivering scrolls spying by swatch. He sent it to noble tents during battle parades. You'd be amazed how many secrets hide in laundry. He pulls out a scroll, marked with stains, grease wine, something that might be ink or not. These are message tests, he explains. Each stain tells you where the bird's been. You suspect he's making some of it up. But honestly, you're too enchanted by the absurdity to care. A nearby perch has a sign, Operation Feathercloak for eyes only. It's upside down. You ask what it means. It means, mind your business. Vey grins. But since you asked, those birds deliver decoy messages. One scroll for the enemy to intercept. The real one, under the wing, written in grease on the feathers. You raise an eyebrow. Won't it wash off? That's why we fly before it rains, he says, utterly serious. There's a pause while a raven lands on his head. He doesn't flinch. You're not sure if this is brilliance madness or both. You're handed a small satchel of dried berries and told to walk to a stump, hold your arm out and wait. You do. Nothing happens for a moment. Then whoosh, a raven lands on your forearm with unexpected weight. Its claws are careful but definite. It eyes you. You hold your breath. Then it poops. Vey calls out. That means he likes you. Of course it does. And here's where the academic debate comes in. Some scholars argue these unlicensed raven handlers were more folklore than fact. Others insist that a handful of them developed real functional techniques, possibly even influencing later military messaging protocols. One theory: these underground aviaries pioneered early misinformation strategies using ravens as decoys. You watch Vey strap a scroll under a bird's wing and whisper, "Don't let me down, Harold." Then Harold flies in the completely wrong direction. Vey doesn't even blink. He'll turn around in a mile. Probably. Sleep now with the smell of damp pine in your nose and the sound of wings overhead, carrying secrets you'll never read. And remember, unlicensed raven handler is not a phrase you thought you'd hear today. Birds apparently prefer parsley-scented trainers. Harold may be the only spy who gets lost on purpose and still gets the job done. The problem with smell: you're in the middle of a training yard that smells like a feast that took a wrong turn. There's raw meat on stone slabs, dried herbs hanging from poles, and a suspiciously overturned wheelbarrow dripping something you choose not to examine. And above it all, a steady chorus of croaks, squawks, and one burp. Welcome to the olfactory chaos of medieval raven training. Your guide today is a wiry woman named Brada. Her apron is stained with what looks like a medieval stew of meat juice ink and enthusiasm. She doesn't shake your hand. Instead, she thrusts a piece of salted pork at you. Hold this. You hold it. A raven swoops down from a perch and grabs the pork with such precision that you nearly drop everything else, including your composure. Brada grins. See? He likes bacon. Hates mutton. Go figure. This is where you learn about the most underappreciated factor in raven-based messaging: smell. Your historical fact for the night. While ravens rely heavily on sight and memory, scent-based training was indeed attempted in various locations, especially where visual landmarks weren't consistent. Some handlers rubbed target perches with strong-smelling herbs like rosemary or mint. Others, like Brada, used meats, specifically meat she cured herself and called tactical jerky. You watch as she rubs a perch with garlic and a bit of goose fat. He follows the smell, she explains, because he thinks he's going home to dinner. Technically, he is. Of course, things don't always go as planned. She points to a row of marked failures, wooden posts, where ravens consistently landed instead of their intended targets. Why? Because the kitchen vent at the barracks blew beef stew fumes in that direction. Brada calls them olfactory diversions. The commander called them a feathered siege of my lunch. The quirky detail tonight: one raven became famous in the village for stealing fish from the monastery's pond, then flying to the next town to drop the heads as messages. No one knew what the messages meant, but they were very fresh. Brada shows you a ledger filled with bizarre entries. Chose bacon root again. Squirrel ignored. Raven refused garlic perch possible grudge. Bird followed lavender. Ended up at candle shop. You can't help but ask, doesn't all this smell mapping get confusing? She nods, tossing a strip of jerky toward a circling bird. Constantly. But better that than relying on Harold's sense of direction. You met Harold right. You have. You're still emotionally recovering. She leads you to a shaded section of the yard where training props are labeled with scent-coded flags. Blue for mint, red for rosemary, yellow for spoiled egg. Don't ask. Some birds are clearly more gifted than others. One raven loops precisely to the mint marker and lands with a hop. Another lands near a sausage link, grabs it, and refuses to continue until it's finished chewing. You can't rush. Genius Brada shrugs. And here comes tonight's scholarly question. Was scent training truly effective? Or just a medieval eccentricity? Historians debate this. Some claim that scent was too unstable, changing with wind and rain. Others argue that for ravens trained in stable familiar environments, scent was a reliable backup to visual cues. What's more, it added redundancy, and medieval people loved a backup plan, especially if it involved herbs and mystery meat. As you sit beside a coop and jot down notes, a raven lands near your foot, drops a cherry pit, and flies off. You look at Brada. She shrugs. He thinks it's treasure. Sleep now with a head full of strange smells and the knowledge that somewhere in medieval Europe, national security once hinged on whether a raven preferred mint or marjoram. And tonight's gentle absurdities, tactical jerky, may be the most underutilized phrase in history. Some ravens just want to snack their way to glory. Medieval espionage smelled faintly of rosemary and regret. When the church got involved, you're standing at the edge of a small courtyard, caught between incense and irritation. The monastery bells have just finished ringing, but the echo lingers like a nosy ant who won't leave. The courtyard is filled with quiet tension and a fair amount of feathers. A raven sits on a wooden post near the chapel door, calm as a saint, but the priest glaring at it looks like he's moments away from performing an exorcism. Demons don't fly. They flap, Father Orlin mutters. You don't correct him. You just watch. The bird, to its credit, blinks once, slowly, with judgment. Tonight's conflict isn't between kingdoms or nobles. It's between bird handlers and clergy. And oh, it's personal. Here's your historical fact. In the later medieval period, some church figures grew deeply suspicious of animal messengers, particularly ravens, because of their long-standing associations with omens, war, and death. In many traditions, ravens were symbols of prophecy or witchcraft. So naturally, when they started showing up carrying tiny scrolls, people noticed, especially the monks, especially monks like Father Orlin, who's currently delivering a very passionate speech to the abbot about foul harbingers of doom, leaving droppings on holy stone. Beside him stands Brother Yorick, an herbalist and part-time raven trainer, doing his best not to roll his eyes out of his head. They're not demons, he says very calmly. They're birds, Father Orlin huffs. Then why do they stare like they know your sins? You have to admit, the raven is staring pretty intensely. Tonight's quirky detail. One abbey developed a rule that no bird could be trained within 100 feet of the main chapel unless it wore a small cross on its leg band, which predictably led to a fashion trend among birds that made them look more pious than half the clergy. Brother Yorick shows you a logbook of his raven roots. They mostly go between herb gardens, local villages, and occasionally a nearby convent with whom the monks exchange medicinal recipes. It's faster than waiting for a novice to stop chatting, he notes. The church's worry, it turns out, isn't just spiritual, it's also political. If birds can carry private messages, who's to stop them from spreading heresy? Or worse, unapproved shopping lists. One cardinal in a letter preserved in Vatican archives reportedly warned, "If the feathered beasts whisper between towers, then so too may the devil." To be fair, that cardinal was later fined for pelting a raven with holy water. So, you witness a compromise being proposed. Brother Yorick offers to let Father Orlin bless the raven loft. Father Orlin counters by suggesting the birds wear tiny bells to ward off spirits. Yorick deadpans. They already do. It's for tracking. Eventually a deal is struck. The ravens can continue flying as long as they don't fly over the chapel during morning prayers. You'd think ravens could understand sacred airspace rules. You later discover that one raven named Benedict has been sneaking into the cloister kitchen to steal bread, and according to the cook, confessing nothing. He's considered a repeat offender. Here's the academic debate, where church objections based on superstition or legitimate concern over unmonitored communication. Some argue that opposition was purely symbolic a way for the church to maintain moral authority. Others suggest there were deeper fears that information flying freely could undermine control. You follow Brother Yorick to the garden, where he gently releases a bird toward the forest line. It circles, once then vanishes into the morning haze. "Say what you want about ravens," he says, "but they deliver faster than the deacon." You both smile, and somewhere nearby, Father Orlin mutters a prayer, loud enough for the bird to hear. Sleep now, knowing that not even the medieval church could completely stop the messengers of the sky. They just tried to make them wear bells. Tonight's gentle amusements. A raven with a tiny cross is both blasphemous and extremely fashionable. The only thing scarier to a monk than a raven is a raven with strong opinions. Church bells may toll for thee, but raven bells toll for absolutely no one. The battlefield courier. The fog is thick tonight. Not the gentle storybook kind, but the heavy wet curtain that blurs torches and turns breathing into a damp chore. You're crouched behind a low wall made of stacked rubble and hope next to a soldier whose only armor seems to be sarcasm and a slightly dented helmet. Across the valley, faint glimmers of firelight suggest an enemy camp silent for now, but not for long, and nestled against your chest, held in a small cage no bigger than a bread box, is a raven. You didn't think this would be your job. And yet, here you are, unofficial assistant to the most feathered member of the war party. Tonight's mission is clear, if wildly optimistic. Deliver a message across the enemy line through the fog to a friendly outpost that may or may not still be there. The message is short as always. Retreat west. Road compromised. Ridge safe. The raven named Knox seems unimpressed. Here's your historical fact. Ravens were occasionally deployed during battle retreats to carry critical messages, especially when roads were blocked or scouts compromised. Though more common with pigeons, some records from skirmishes in northern Europe mention black messengers used under cover of night, capitalizing on the bird's low visibility and sharp homing sense. You open the cage. Knox waits. He's not nervous. You are. Then he launches. No sound, no panic. Just black wings disappearing into a blacker night. You and the soldier wait. Neither of you speak for a moment. Then he mutters, "Hope he doesn't stop for snacks." You're about to chuckle when a whisper comes from the left. The commander. He go. He went, you nod. The commander exhales. Let's hope he gets there before we do. And now comes the wait. The anxious crawl through your bones. Wait. That turns minutes into miles. You stay low, listening to the drip of water from a tree branch and the soft rustle of fabric as the other scouts reposition. No horns, no cries, just fog and thoughts. Tonight's oddity. One unit reportedly tried to affix tiny lanterns to raven leg bands for nighttime visibility. It did not go well. The birds refused to fly, possibly insulted by the fashion choice. The experiment was abandoned after one raven swooped low and caused a fire in the commander's tent. Meanwhile, your commander has a different trick. Each raven is trained to return to a scent-marked perch using a mix of oil and rosemary. The scent guides them like a perfume-based compass. You learn that Knox's perch is rubbed with lavender and bear fat, a combination you never expected to say out loud. And here's the scholarly debate of the evening. Was raven deployment truly tactical or just desperation with wings? Historians are split. Some believe these birds were merely backup systems used when human runners failed. Others argue they were quietly essential, especially in regions with dense forests or marshes where horses and men moved like molasses. Back on the field, a flicker of motion. A sentry points upward. You follow the gesture, and yes, a silhouette. Gliding, swooping, landing on a low branch beside the commander. Knox is back. The commander unties the scroll, now faintly damp, and reads the reply. Received. West Road safe. Confirmed. It's like watching the weight fall off an entire camp's shoulders. Within moments, silent signals pass down the line. Packs are lifted. Fires are snuffed. Boots crunch in unison as the retreat begins, not in panic, but in careful, quiet rhythm. And you help Reebok's Knox, who ruffles his feathers and lets out a grumpy croak. Yeah, you whisper. You earned it. Sleep now. Remembering that in the thick of battle, in the worst of weather, one small messenger could shift the entire tide of fate and never once ask for glory. Tonight's battlefield giggles. Tactical lanterns on ravens, great in theory, catastrophic in tents. Lavender and bear fat, coming soon to a cologne counter near you. Knox may be the only soldier in history whose greatest weapon was silence. The royal cosplay scandal. The parade is late, as always. You're standing beneath a fluttering silk canopy, strung between two pomegranate trees, surrounded by nobles in embroidered tunics. Guards who look bored enough to nap standing up, and one overly enthusiastic lute player who's been playing the same 4 chords for 20 minutes. But all eyes eventually turn upward. A raven circles the sky above the courtyard. Not just any raven. This one wears a tiny ribbon around its leg-colored purple and gold, the heraldic colors of House Belward. And yes, someone absolutely gave it a title. That's Sir Talon II, whispers a page in awe. Knighted last spring, after he carried word of Lord Belward's victory at Grey Ridge. You blink. They knighted a bird. Of course. They held a feast. Gave him a crumb cake. Of course they did. Welcome to the era of noble raven cosplay. Here's your historical fact. During the late medieval period, some aristocrats, particularly in border regions, began treating their messenger ravens as symbols of prestige, assigning them titles, colors, and even coat of arms-like markings. Though primarily ceremonial, some of these birds were genuinely trained, and others were just expensive pets with better wardrobes than most squires. And so enters tonight's most delightful quirk. In the court of Lord Belward ravens were given official ranks. One was even dubbed High Feather Marshal of the Western Air, another Sir Peckington the Watchful. He reportedly bit the steward and was demoted. You watch as Sir Talon II lands on a velvet-covered perch to polite applause. A servant retrieves the message from his leg bows and hands it to a herald who reads aloud. The road to Delmere is clear. Tolls waved for the wedding retinue. Everyone claps. Not for the content, for the delivery. This isn't about efficiency. It's about display, spectacle, proof that even the birds serve the house. And naturally, the trend spreads. Within weeks, neighboring lords begin naming their own birds. Lady Wingra of Eastmere Baron Beekman, the Count of Cawes. Suddenly ravens are appearing at banquets, tournaments, and once infamously during a theater performance where one interrupted a soliloquy by stealing the actor's feathered hat. The scholarly debate. Was this indulgence just noble eccentricity, or a calculated use of spectacle to demonstrate power? Some historians argue that dressing up ravens and giving them names wasn't just whimsy, it reinforced authority through symbolism. Even the skies obey us, as one chronicler put it. Others say it was simply the medieval version of rich people dressing up their dogs. You sneak into the aviary after the parade, because of course there's a royal aviary. Each raven has a nameplate, a feeding schedule, and a perch padded with imported moss. One even has a miniature mirror. He appears to like himself. A young falconer in training tells you in hushed tones that not all of the birds are actually trained. Some just hop to the feast table and act fancy. One particularly chubby raven, dubbed Duke Featherwell, reportedly hasn't flown in weeks, but gets carried on a pillow anyway. Then the twist won. Raven Sir Talon I, the original, was lost during a snowstorm, only to return 3 months later to an entirely different estate. There, he delivered a long-forgotten note about firewood prices, prompting a temporary alliance between two feuding houses. By accident. I guess even fake nobility can do some good, says the young falconer. You nod, and just as you turn to leave, you hear a nobleman arguing with a scribe over how to spell cosquire. Sleep now, dreaming of velvet-clad ravens' titles that don't make sense, and a world where delivering a message could win you a seat at the royal feast. And your noble giggles for the night. Sir Peckington was briefly banned from court for eating a guest's pie. Someone designed a crest with a quill, a wing, and a very smug expression. Historians are still debating whether Baron Beekman was a real raven or a very confused chicken. The bloodless badminton incident. You're in a manor courtyard surrounded by banners, picnic blankets, and the distinct sound of nobles trying to act like they understand sports. Welcome to the annual Spring Day diversion, a light-hearted festival meant to build alliances, show off silks, and pretend that everyone isn't secretly plotting against each other. And this year, the main event is a game of shuttle plume, a medieval variant of badminton only, with more ribbon, fewer rules, and a great deal more yelling about honor. But today's entertainment is about to be outshined, because here comes a raven, not just any raven. This one is carrying a scroll. So far normal, except he's headed for the wrong team. The announcer pauses mid-shout. The players stop mid-lunge. The bird lands squarely in front of the Duke of Grellan's bench, flutters once, and drops the scroll directly into the lap of Lady Winlora of House Marrow, his opponent. Confused silence. Then someone opens the scroll. To Lord Grellan, confirmed troop movement at sundown. Bridge clear. Banner red. Oops. You watch as faces twist from amusement to horror to awkward laughter, all within 5 seconds. The Duke goes pale. Lady Winlora raises one delicate eyebrow and folds the scroll neatly back up. "Thank you for your honesty," she says sweetly. The raven, meanwhile, looks quite proud of itself, and so unfolds what will become known in 3 different family journals as the bloodless badminton incident. Here's your historical fact. Though rare misdirected raven messages have been recorded in several medieval documents, most of these incidents involved poorly trained birds or confusing flight conditions, storms, smoke, or in one case, a siege happening mid-flight. The consequences range from mildly embarrassing to politically catastrophic. Tonight's quirky twist. One particularly nosy abbot developed a decoy scroll practice training birds to deliver fake messages with vague or misleading content in case they were intercepted. That practice may have inspired early forms of battlefield misdirection or just confused everyone equally. Back in the courtyard, nobles are whispering. A scribe is furiously taking notes, and the steward is trying to usher the raven away with a piece of dried fig. The falconer responsible, Sir Janrick, is summoned and sweating. He flew the same route as always, he insists. He must have caught a draft and veered. The Duke isn't impressed. A draft doesn't make him pick the enemy's lap. You suspect Sir Janrick will be reassigned to something with fewer feathers. As the tournament resumes now with slightly more tension than before, the raven loops back around and lands atop the trophy stand. No one shoos him off. The scroll is passed between advisors, then scribes. Then a messenger runs off on foot, because apparently people no longer trust the skies. Later, you overhear 2 young nobles gossiping. Do you think the bird was bribed? No, but I think it has taste. I mean, look how it avoids Grellin's bannermen. You retreat to the stables, where a few off-duty ravens perch in lazy silence. One is being brushed. Another is picking seeds from a carved wooden bowl that says, "Property of Lord Featherfax." You ask the stable hand whether ravens ever do this sort of thing on purpose. "Oh, all the time," she says. You cross a raven, it remembers. Forget to feed it. Expect a detour. Say something rude. Your next message goes to your ex-mother-in-law. You blink. They have ex-mothers-in-law. She shrugs. Emotionally, yes. Here's tonight's academic conundrum. Do ravens ever deliver based on preference or grudge? There's no hard evidence, of course, but field notes from handlers sometimes mention favorites or behavior shifts after incident. Whether that means actual judgment or just coincidence remains a mystery. You end the day watching the raven preen on its perch, basking in its accidental fame. Some say it ruined the game. Others claim it prevented a war, and you're starting to think the raven did exactly what it meant to do. Sleep now, knowing that sometimes history pivots not on sword or crown, but on one very well-timed delivery to the wrong lap. Tonight's sporting highlights. The raven got more applause than the tournament champion. Lord Grellin is now known as the one who lost to a bird. Sir Janrick has reportedly switched to ducks. No scrolls, just vibes. The feather market underground. It's market day in the lower quarter, which means smells, noises, and opinions are flying in every direction, and not just from the humans. You sidestep a runaway cabbage duck under a squealing goat and nearly trip over a child selling miracle moss that smells suspiciously like wet laundry. But what catches your attention isn't the chaos. It's the stall, tucked quietly beneath a striped canopy, far too clean, far too calm. A hand-lettered sign reads, "Authentic Raven Feathers for Luck, Love, and Letters." Beside it, tiny scroll cases, feather quills, dyed unnatural shades of purple, and what appears to be a raven leg band engraved with a sigil that suspiciously resembles a royal crest. You've stumbled into the black market of bird-based espionage. And the vendor, a woman with more rings than fingers, who introduces herself as Madame Pevrin and doesn't blink when you ask, "Is that a real message tube?" "Oh, yes," she says. "Recovered from the siege of Tholmir, or maybe the siege of Tholmire." The spelling shifts depending on how much you pay. Tonight's fact: while ravens themselves were not commonly traded on open markets, raven-related goods, feathers, mock message tubes, even forged noble seals, began circulating among merchants, fortune-tellers, and amateur spies during times of unrest. Some claimed they brought luck. Others used them as props in schemes. A few actually worked. And the quirky detail: a few scrolls on record were discovered to be complete forgeries designed to be intercepted. One even contained a drawing of a pig in a crown labeled "Future King." That scroll reportedly started a barroom brawl and an awkward 3-day standoff. Back in the market, Madame Pevrin is showing off her communication starter kits. These include one pre-stained scroll for authenticity, a feather dyed with soot and rose oil, smells of mystery, and a carrier pigeon painted black. You eye the bird. That's not a raven. She leans in. Only if you squint. You soon learn that Pevrin's regular clients include lovelorn teenagers sending anonymous poems, always intercepted, minor nobles hoping to fake correspondence with bigger fish, bards trying to look mysterious before performances, one monk who uses the feathers as bookmarks because they just feel important. Of course, there's risk involved. Using a counterfeit raven seal. That's a jailable offense in some towns. Delivering false messages could get you banned from 3 taverns and 1 bakery. Pretending your bird is royal social suicide, but people keep coming. And the real fun: some of these forged scrolls have made it into official records. A historian once included a raven-delivered love confession in a local chronicle, thinking it was part of a diplomatic exchange. The resulting footnote caused confusion for generations. Pevrin opens a velvet-lined case and pulls out what she calls a conversation starter scroll. It's empty. That's the point, she says. You deliver it and let the recipient wonder. You ask how many people actually use her goods to send real messages. She laughs. Oh no, darling. This is theater. This is pageantry. This is about making someone think you have a raven. You glance around and see at least 3 people buying her wares. One asks, "Will this feather guarantee a good harvest?" Pevrin replies, without missing a beat, "Only if you keep it near your onions." Tonight's scholarly dilemma: how much of the medieval raven economy was real and how much was bluff? Modern historians admit the line is blurry. Merchants like Pevrin walk the space between utility and spectacle, fueling the idea of raven messaging, even where no real bird was involved. Before you leave, you purchase a small scroll labeled "For Secrets Unsaid." It's blank, but somehow it feels like the most honest message you've seen all day. Sleep now, with the scent of rose oil and soot in the air, and the knowledge that sometimes the illusion of a message is more powerful than the message itself. Tonight's back alley chuckles. One merchant reportedly tried to train a rooster to deliver messages. It only delivered chaos. Raven cosplay kits once outsold prayer candles in a border town for 2 consecutive months. Pevrin's top seller. A scroll that simply reads, "This never happened." The Feather Code Analyst. You're back indoors tonight in a narrow tower room lit by 2 candles and one very determined woman who hasn't blinked in what feels like an hour. Scrolls are stacked to the rafters. Feathers hang from pegs like drying herbs, and ink blotches decorate every surface like someone tried to start a Rorschach test and got distracted halfway. Welcome to the office of Mistress Hulda Royal Scribe, an alleged Feather Code Analyst. I don't read messages, she says flatly, adjusting her spectacles with inky fingers. I read the messengers. You raise an eyebrow. She points to a pile of black feathers spread across a linen cloth like a forensic buffet. They tell me everything she says. Route, speed, weather, handling, mood. Mood, you echo. Some birds hold tension in the left primaries. You nod, like that makes perfect sense. Tonight's historical fact. While many scribes focused on the content of messages, a small number of court clerks and scholars paid close attention to the physical condition of messenger birds and their gear. Broken seals, damp scrolls, dirty claws. These were clues. Some took it further, noting featherware soot traces, and even the tightness of leg straps to determine how the bird had been handled, where it might have roosted, or whether it had been intercepted. Hulda gestures to 3 feathers laid out on a board. This one arrived clean. Likely no wind, or a very clever hat. She slides another forward. This one's ends are split, means rain, or panic. Then she picks up a third with tweezers and taps it against her thumb. This one came from a raven that flew through smoke and landed somewhere with oak dust. Probably a siege camp. Message was blank, by the way. Classic spy move. You ask if anyone believes her. She sighs. Not officially. But the Chancellor's been in here 3 times this week. Says he's just curious. Always brings muffins. Tonight's quirky delight. Hulda developed her own index of feather types and conditions, which she refers to as the flight print. According to her, every raven has a unique flight signature, like a fingerprint only, fluffier. She claims she can match feathers to birds by the curve of the shaft and the texture of the barbs. She's wrong, maybe 30% of the time, but the confidence is unshakable. She hands you a magnifying lens and lets you inspect a feather-tagged Delmere incident. It's tinged with ash and something sticky. You ask what it is. Cherry jam, she says. The cook had a raven problem that week. There's a larger board on the far wall, labeled patterns. It's covered in tiny notes pinned to feathers. Arrows connect dots. It looks like a conspiracy web, or a murder mystery, or both. One note reads, repeated left wing wear. Route to coast, possibly doubled. Another, slight lavender scent, same as Envoy's cloak. Interesting. You get the feeling Hulda knows things even the ravens don't. And here comes tonight's academic tug-of-war. Was feather analysis, real data gathering, or just interpretive guesswork? Modern scholars remain skeptical. But medieval records show that feather condition did influence judgments, especially in courts, where timely delivery mattered and suspicion ran high. Hulda once helped solve a forgery scandal when she noticed 2 different birds were using the same royal ink, but with vastly different featherwear. One bird was pampered. The other had flown through a briar patch. Guess which one was lying? You ask her if she ever considered working with live birds. She waves a hand. Too noisy. Feathers don't talk back. As you prepare to leave, she hands you a tiny bundle wrapped in twine. For dreams, she says. You open it later and find a single feather dipped in lavender wax, along with a note. Even silent wings leave a trail. Sleep now, surrounded by parchment and plumage, and let your mind drift on invisible air currents, guided by those who read not the message, but the flight itself. Tonight's whispered wonders. Halda once sent a feather as a message. It was received and misunderstood as a threat. She was thrilled. The flight print theory is currently ignored by every major university except one library cat that keeps sitting on it. Some ravens fly straight, some spiral. Some, according to Halda, just like to make things dramatic. The map of wings. You're standing in the middle of what looks like a cartographer's dream and a bird trainer's fever dream rolled into one. Scrolls spill from shelves. There are charts painted directly onto the walls. Lines, arcs, weather notes, and symbols you're fairly sure don't belong to any known language. Overhead, a mobile made of tiny wooden ravens spins slowly in the draft, casting shadows like a flock in mid-migration. Welcome to the mapping loft. Your host is Master Imbric, a man whose beard is braided into compass points and whose boots are covered in parchment dust. We map them, he says proudly, because they already mapped us. You nod politely. You're not entirely sure what that means yet, but it feels profound. Here's your historical fact. Some late medieval military and trade outposts kept flight records of messenger birds, not just who sent what, but how long it took, where the birds landed, what weather they encountered. These notes eventually helped establish early courier zones and laid the groundwork for travel forecasts in some regions. In short, birds were medieval GPS feathery, occasionally stubborn GPS. Imbric gestures to a massive map stretched across the far wall. It's not of kingdoms or roads, it's of bird routes, tiny inked loops, crisscross from tower to tower cloister to keep herb garden to battlefield. Some lines are dotted storm disruption. Some are doubled paired flights. A few are ominously smudged with soot. Those were never completed. We discovered something strange, Imbric says, tracing one loop. Ravens never flew over Darnick's hold. Not once. They went around. Always. Why? He shrugs. Some say wind patterns. Some say cursed chimney. One says the cook throws boots. The map isn't static. He updates it daily with help from roving scribes and a few obsessed falconers. One chart shows seasonal shifts, birds flying lower in summer, higher in spring. Another shows preferred roosting sites based on snack availability. Apparently dried figs are very persuasive. Here's tonight's delightful oddity. Imbric once trained ravens to wear charcoal-dusted bands so they'd leave faint streaks on landing boards. It allowed him to trace touch points. Unfortunately, it also made everything look like it had been handled by soot-covered toddlers. The abbot was not amused. He pulls out a drawer labeled Anomalies. Inside feathers scroll fragments, a tiny compass with a cracked dial, and one scribbled note that reads, "Bird landed on shipmast. Delivered scroll to fishmonger. No explanation." You point at it. "And you kept this?" "Of course." That bird broke 3 travel predictions and accidentally started a rumor about a naval invasion. Very informative. Imbric explains that over time, patterns emerged. Ravens preferred certain routes, avoided others, and even responded differently based on time of day. He suspects there's an entire language of air currents and landmarks only birds understand. "We're just borrowing it," he adds. "Badly. You ask how accurate the maps are." He grimaces. About 70%. Better than the king's astrologer, worse than the village dog. And now comes the scholarly debate. Can animal instinct truly be mapped? Some researchers argue that birds like ravens operate on fixed logic wind memory food. Others believe their behavior contains a form of improvisational intelligence, reading the world moment to moment in ways no parchment can capture. Imbric, for his part, believes both. They fly plans we can't see. But sometimes, he says, tapping the wall map, we catch the echoes. You spend the evening helping mark new return points in charcoal. One raven landed on a brewery roof, then returned with hops on its feet. He's got good taste, Imbric mutters. As night falls, the map room glows with candlelight and the slow, lazy circling of wooden birds overhead. You feel as if you're inside a compass, turning slowly with the wind. Sleep now, with visions of flight lines and invisible trails, knowing that every turn of a wing leaves a mark somewhere if only someone looks close enough. Tonight's directional musings. One raven flew a perfect figure 8 for 6 days. It's now nicknamed Infinity. The brewery landing bird received honorary drink tokens. He has not returned them. There's a disputed map note that simply reads, "Avoid the goose field, just trust me." When the ravens went silent, it starts with a stillness. No flapping, no croaks, no soft thuds of talons against stone. Just silence. And for a raven loft, silence is not golden, it's ominous. You're back at the outpost tower, watching the handler pace like someone waiting for a verdict. The birds haven't returned. Not one. Not in hours. Not in days. The perch stands empty, scrolls undelivered, and even the pigeons seem nervous. 14 ravens, the handler mutters. Gone. Not dead. Just not back. You glance at the sky. Clear. Blue. Nothing overhead but clouds and questions. Tonight's historical fact. There are scattered records of periods where entire raven messenger systems went quiet. No returns, no sightings, no interceptions. Some blamed storms, others blamed poaching, and at least one monastery blamed divine punishment for allowing birds to carry unholy gossip. Whatever the reason, these silences were taken seriously, sometimes as omens, other times as strategic threats, because in medieval warfare, no news wasn't neutral, it was dangerous. With the birds silent, communication breaks down. Supplies go to the wrong towns. Reinforcements arrive late. One village holds a festival 2 weeks early and runs out of ale before the real guests arrive. A minor tragedy. The captain at this outpost orders all messages to be copied and sent by foot. It'll take longer, he says, but at least legs don't molt. And the theories begin. Some say the birds were intercepted, captured by rival handlers, and retrained. Others whisper that a rival court set up a raven wall, baiting birds away with food shiny objects or just really attractive roof tiles. One tale suggests a rogue knight had started his own raven sanctuary deep in the woods. They're tired, he supposedly said. They deserve a vacation. Of course, there's also the storm theory. A coastal squall had swept through the northern routes just 2 days prior. Perhaps they were grounded, or worse, diverted. The quirky detail. One raven returned after 6 days carrying not a message, but a necklace. No one knows where it came from, or who it belonged to. It now hangs in the tower's map room as a reminder that ravens are weird. The scholar's dilemma tonight: were these disappearances logistical failures, or did they represent early examples of bird jamming, deliberate efforts to confuse or reroute trained messengers? Some theorists believe rival factions employ decoy perches scented with familiar oils to lure birds off course. Others insist the birds simply took a break. You meet a quiet novice named Emmerich, who's been recording feather findings across the region. I found 3 near the orchard, he says. Same markings. No scrolls. No blood. He shows you a sketch, raven tracks in the dirt, then nothing. Just an empty perch and a half-eaten apple. Maybe they just got tired of our messages, he adds. You can't blame them. Most scrolls are orders updates or requests for more cheese. By nightfall, 5 more birds are still missing. The loft is quiet. The air feels too still, like a breath held too long. You stand by an empty perch and wonder what if the ravens are watching from somewhere else, waiting, judging, taking notes. Sleep now, with one eye on the sky and the other on the horizon, remembering that even the most loyal messengers sometimes vanish and leave behind only riddles and feathers. Tonight's vanishing acts. One raven was found living with a family of ferrets. He seemed happy. The ferrets were confused. A noblewoman insisted the birds were staging a protest. She wrote them a poem. No one responded. The necklace-bearing raven has since been promoted to Minister of Mystery. No one knows who approved this. Magic or method? You're huddled near the hearth of a candlelit apothecary, where every surface is cluttered with vials, feathers, and scrolls wrapped in twine. The room smells like burnt rosemary and deep suspicion. In the corner, a raven preens under the watchful eye of a woman known only as Lice. She stirs a pot of something thick and green and says without turning, "You don't train ravens. You enchant them." You pause already, questioning your life choices. Tonight's conversation has nothing to do with battle plans or delivery routes. It's about belief. Because when ravens did, the impossible, flew farther, returned faster, delivered messages at uncanny moments, some didn't credit training. They credited magic. Here's your historical fact. While most raven messaging was grounded in methodical routines and animal behavior, medieval folk sometimes attributed success to supernatural influence. Some believed ravens could hear thoughts, read emotions, or see the future. A few even claimed ravens were connected to saints or spirits acting as intermediaries. And Li leans in on the myth. These birds, she says, pulling a feather from a jar of violet oil, don't obey orders. They obey intention. That's why they always know where to go. That's why they always return unless you lie to them. You raise an eyebrow. They hate lies, she adds with a wink. Lice demonstrates her ritual. She burns lavender whispers the name of the destination and waves a strip of linen in slow circles before tying it to the raven's leg. The bird tilts its head, then launches into the night with perfect grace. Coincidence? You think not. Mostly because the raven circles, once lets out a raspy caw and drops a pebble on your boot. You don't know what it means. Lice interprets it as approval. Tonight's quirky detail. Some communities performed wing blessings before major flights, reciting protective verses, ringing bells, or placing feathers under altars. One record even notes a baker who insisted all raven scrolls be passed through rising bread dough to keep them warm and pure. It didn't help with speed, but the birds smelled amazing. You ask Lise whether she considers herself a mage. She laughs. I'm a cook with good aim and a better story. Still, you can't shake the feeling that something's different here. The birds seem more attuned. They land without hesitation. They don't squawk. they listen. The scholarly debate. Were these rituals psychological reinforcement for the handlers? Or did they genuinely affect bird behavior? Some researchers propose that rituals helped create consistency and calm around the birds, making them more likely to remember patterns. Others dismiss it as theatrical fluff. But then Lise shows you a page from an old grimoire. It's titled, Of Wings and Whispers. The diagram resembles a raven flight path, but intertwined with lunar phases, herbal bundles, and something that looks suspiciously like a star map. Magic or method? She asks. Why not both? You spend the rest of the evening sipping something warm and slightly suspicious, while a raven named Bramble lands near the window and taps the glass. He's early Lise notes. Means the message was heavy. You don't ask how she knows. You're not sure you want to. Sleep now, between logic and legend, with the quiet rustle of wings just beyond the shutters, and the sense that sometimes even history leaves room for mystery. Tonight's gently enchanted trivia. One village believed ravens could carry dreams if you tied a lavender sprig to their legs. No one remembers what the dreams were. A raven named Echo reportedly refused to fly under a waning moon. He did, however, accept meatballs. No one has successfully disproven the Baker theory, but many support it on culinary grounds. Feather poetry and inked wings. You're inside a stone chamber that smells like lamp oil, beeswax, and overthinking. The walls are covered in parchment scraps and lines of verse, and the man hunched at the desk hasn't noticed your presence. He's too focused on brushing ink across a feather. Not parchment, a feather. This is Arden, a self-proclaimed avian calligrapher and part-time poet. He doesn't write messages on scrolls. He writes on birds, specifically their feathers. Tonight's historical fact. In some rare cases, ink was used to mark raven feathers not just for identification, but as a form of artistic or symbolic expression. These weren't practical messages, but rather gestures, warnings, blessings, or, in the case of Arden, emotionally complex haiku. You clear your throat. He startles, then beams. Ah, you're just in time for the drying phase. You inch closer. On the feather he's working with, you can just barely make out the words. Message without mouth, flying past the watchful eye. Wind holds all my truth. You blink. That's going on a bird. Oh yes, he says, carefully setting it on a stand. To Lady Ethelwyn. She enjoys melancholic verse. Of course she does. Around the room are dozens of feathers, each labeled with initials, a date, and the weather at the time of writing. It affects the tone, Arden explains. Humidity ruins the rhyme scheme. You nod, as though that sentence makes any sense at all. The oddity of the evening. Arden's birds are trained to land dramatically gliding in slow sweeping arcs before settling on balconies, garden walls, or on one memorable occasion, the back of a noble's horse during a wedding. He claims it's poetic timing. The horse disagreed. You ask how the ink stays on. He shows you a special mixture part, charcoal, part wine, sediment, part spirit of plum. It smells like poetry and mild fermentation. Each message is written not to be read immediately, but to be seen. The recipient receives a bird with a line of verse across its wing, or a single word spiraling along a tail feather. Sometimes, I don't even send a message scroll, Arden confesses. Just the feather. If they understand it, they understand me. You wonder aloud how often that works. He hesitates. Once. Maybe twice. Still, it's undeniably beautiful. And here's tonight's scholarly puzzle. Was feather writing a fad in art, or a form of coded language? A few medieval records mention ravens arriving with symbols or sigils inked onto them. Some political, some devotional, some questionable. Whether these were meant to communicate or intimidate remains debated. You hold one of Arden's earlier works, a wing feather bearing the phrase, "Return to me soon," or not at all. It's unclear if that was meant for the raven or the recipient, possibly both. There's something haunting about the idea of words in flight of messages, carried not just by the bird, but etched into its very body. Arden shows you a feather that never flew. He wrote a full sonnet on it, then trained the raven to keep its wings closed until sunset. It arrived, then unfolded. He grins. Dramatic pause. You're starting to understand. In Arden's world, the message is never just what's said. It's how, when, where, and what the wings looked like when they landed. Sleep now, with phrases written in ink and carried by feathers, knowing that even the sky has room for poetry if you send it gently enough. Tonight's winged wordplay. One raven once returned with a feather that read, "Oops." No further explanation was ever given. Arden once tried scented ink. The raven smelled like cinnamon for 2 weeks. It was very popular. A noblewoman received a feather that simply read, "Soon." She has not stopped speculating since. The gleaming flight trick. You're on a hillside at dusk, the kind of golden hour that makes even war camps look vaguely artistic. Below, soldiers shuffle into formation, while banners snap in the breeze. But your attention is upward toward the cliffs, where a line of ravens is being fitted with something shiny. You blink. Yes, those are polished discs, tiny mirrors strapped just below their wings. What am I watching, you ask the nearest figure, who turns out to be a battle tactician with soot-smudged spectacles and a grin that says, "I know something you don't." You're about to witness a decoy flight, she says. Works like a charm on sunny days, especially when you need the enemy to believe reinforcements are on the way. Welcome to the world of gleam tactics, where ravens become reflections. Here's your historical fact. In a few scattered military records from the late medieval period, commanders used birds to create visual illusions, reflecting light-scattering signals or mimicking the sparkle of armor from a distance. Though rare and logistically complex, these mirror flights were intended to startle, distract, or intimidate. The ravens are released in waves, each trained to fly in a wide arc across the valley. As the sun hits the mirrors, beams flicker like glinting metal. From below, it looks like cavalry in motion, or some glittering airborne force descending from the hills. The enemy camp stirs. Horns sound. Men run to formation. And your side, they wait, smiling. Tonight's quirky twist. One enterprising lord attempted to enhance the gleam effect by tying silver leaf to his ravens. Unfortunately, they kept diving into lakes, mistaking their own reflections for snacks. The project was quietly shelved after a particularly soggy campaign. Back on the ridge, the tactician checks her notes. They'll loop twice, then return. Except this one, he prefers a dramatic third pass. Total show-off. You watch the ravens bank and turn, catching just enough light to confuse anyone not expecting it. It's not perfect, but it's effective and dramatic. You ask how the birds were trained to fly in formation. She shrugs. You don't train birds. You bribe them. In pairs. Turns out the secret isn't discipline, it's rivalry. Paired ravens are more likely to follow each other in synchronized loops, especially when the reward is fresh figs and praise from a handler who smells like dried fruit. The academic debate. Were light reflection tactics legitimate or exaggerated by romanticized war journals? Some scholars believe mirror flights were symbolic gestures. Psychological warfare, not tactical. Others argue that in specific lighting and terrain, they created just enough uncertainty to buy time or stall aggression. You lean against a rock and watch the birds finish their second loop. Sure enough, one raven breaks off and flies a little lower, a little flashier, before swooping upward again in what can only be described as a curtain call. The tactician sighs. He always does that. You ask if they've ever used the ravens at night. Only once, she says. We tried attaching glowing moss to their harnesses. How'd it go? Accidentally signaled a wedding. They still send us cake every spring. As the ravens return to their perches, their mirror harnesses removed and replaced with small cloth wraps, the sun dips below the ridge. The distraction worked. No arrows fired. No horns blown, just whispers and paranoia on the other side. You help brush down one of the birds who stares at you like he deserves applause. You give him a bow. Sleep now, knowing that in the great dance of war and deception, sometimes a shimmer of light and a well-timed bird can hold more sway than a battalion. Tonight's reflective amusements. One raven got too attached to his mirror and refused to fly unless he could see himself first. The tactic was later adopted by a barred troop trying to simulate flying stars. It worked until they lost the birds. Scholars still argue whether the first mirror flight report was military brilliance or just someone misinterpreting a shiny accident. The intelligence leak with feathers. Tonight you're not in a tower, nor a forest, nor a cozy candlelit nook. You're in a holding cell. It's drafty, smells like regret and old onions. And across from you, separated by a creaky wooden table, is a young man with ink-stained cuffs and the worst poker face in 4 kingdoms. He's the spy, or was until this morning. And it all unraveled because of a raven. Here's your historical fact. As the use of ravens in communication grew more sophisticated, so did attempts to exploit them. Spies began relying on birds to deliver hidden messages, sometimes literal scrolls, other times small objects or cryptic marks. But the birds weren't always loyal to humans. And sometimes they got hungry halfway through the mission. This particular spy name, withheld due to embarrassment, had trained a raven to fly from his chamber window to a neutral border post, carrying intelligence in a hollowed quill tucked beneath its wing. Simple, elegant, secret. Except the bird got distracted by sausages hanging in a watchtower kitchen. It swooped, dropped the quill, and landed directly on a banquet table, where the Duchess's pet squirrel promptly bit it and caused enough of a scene that everyone noticed the suspicious passenger. And here comes tonight's oddity, that hollow quill, not just any scroll. It was written in lemon juice, an invisible ink method known even in medieval times. Heat it, and the message appears, which is exactly what the squirrel did by dragging it too close to a brazier. Boom. Secrets exposed instantly. Back in the cell, the spy explains his method. I fed the bird nut-soaked breadcrumbs, he says, each type flavored differently for different routes. You nod impressed and mildly disturbed. His raven was named Ivor. He was allegedly very smart, very punctual, and had excellent balance. He also had a fondness for mirrors, which might explain why he frequently landed on polished helmets. The debate among scholars, whether raven espionage was ever truly secure. Some argue birds could be trained to respond to subtle cues, including scents, sounds, or even specific individuals. Others believe the whole enterprise was deeply flawed, risky, uncontrollable, and dependent on creatures who sometimes forgot they were supposed to deliver state secrets and not hunt shiny beetles. You ask the spy if he regrets trusting a bird with classified information. He shrugs. More than trusting my roommate. Less than trusting the sausage tower. You're not sure if he's serious. As he's led away for interrogation, which apparently involves stern lectures and denial of spiced cider, you're shown the recovered message. Troop movement confirmed. Bridge weak. Burn after reading. The guards considered it an invitation and immediately set it on fire. The raven, meanwhile, has been relocated to a more neutral profession birthday party courier for a very rich merchant's children. He's reportedly thriving. You visit the handlers who intercepted the scroll. They're still laughing. We thought it was a prank, one says. Then we saw the seal. Then we spilled soup on it. Apparently, soup reveals lemon ink even faster than heat. A new technique is born. The moral of the evening, never assume your raven can resist lunch. And sleep now, gentle dreamer, with the soft chuckle of guards and the flutter of feathers overhead, knowing that even the sharpest plan can be undone by a sausage. Tonight's accidental exposés. One spy used a raven trained to land only on red cloth. He was caught when a noblewoman wore crimson to dinner. Another raven got confused and delivered 4 identical scrolls to the same person. He now leads a very chaotic province. Ivor, the sausage-loving raven, has since refused all espionage. He works strictly in snack deliveries now. When ravens disobeyed, the sun is setting over the quiet hills, the kind of pink-orange glow that makes everything look a bit more forgiving. Unless you're Captain Lorne, standing in the center of a military camp, red in the face, waving his arms at the sky like he's trying to direct traffic with invisible flags. They're circling again, he barks. Why are they circling again? You look up. Sure enough, 5 ravens. Round and round. Not delivering messages. Not flying toward the intended targets. Just doing graceful, uninterrupted loops over the same cluster of tents like feathered gossip columns. Are they confused? Someone asks. No, says Lorne, glaring. They're mocking me. Tonight's story is about that most terrifying of medieval truths. Animals don't always listen. Here's your historical fact. While ravens were trained to return to familiar locations and handlers, there are several recorded incidents of birds refusing commands mid-flight. Some returned prematurely. Some chose alternate perches. And some, like tonight's stars, just refused to land at all. Why, no one knows for sure. Weather, wind, unusual smells, or the sudden and unfortunate presence of roast chicken in an open field, all plausible. But in some cases, handlers believed it was something more personal, a protest, a power move. And here comes the night's delightfully strange detail. One captain documented a raven's refusal to deliver messages for 3 days. After someone new joined the camp, who wore a wide-brimmed hat. The bird, he noted, grimly despises brimmed fashion. Back in the camp, Captain Lorne is consulting with the handler, a soft-spoken woman named Brielle, who has the air of someone perpetually 5 minutes away from giving up. They're bored, she explains. Birds don't get bored, Lorne insists. They're ravens, she replies. They get bored professionally. You sit beside her as she tosses small bread cubes near the perch, trying to lure one bird down. It circles, considers, then changes direction and glides effortlessly above the latrine tent. Again. You think they're doing this on purpose, you ask? Absolutely, she says. They hate the new guy. What new guy? As if on cue, a soldier strolls past, wearing an overly polished breastplate and a scented sash. There he is, Brielle mutters. They think he's loud and smells like citrus. It throws them off. Tonight's academic debate: did ravens respond to specific people smells or even moods? Some historians believe trained birds formed preferences flying more accurately for calm, consistent handlers. Others suggest that any deviation from routine new uniforms, odd lighting, a change in accent could trigger hesitancy or avoidance. And the outcome: chaos, messages delayed, camps left in the dark. Once an entire feast was postponed because the roast goose was mistaken for a landing marker and caused a raven standoff. But the best part: the solutions people came up with. One lord painted fake perches on rooftops to fool birds into landing. Another introduced emotional support squirrels to calm the loft that did not go well. Brielle, however, takes a different approach: bribes. She pulls out a tiny pouch of sugared dates. They know these, she says. I only give them when it's important. You ask if that works. She smirks. Sometimes. And sometimes they eat wink and fly right back up. You watch as one raven finally dips lower, lower, and lands. There's cheering, relief. One man salutes the bird, but then the raven just sits there. No scroll, just vibes. Sleep now under a circling sky, knowing that even history's most clever messengers sometimes choose their own path, especially when that path loops beautifully over your tent for an hour and a half. Tonight's rebellious flights. One raven reportedly stopped working entirely after being called feather-brained by a squire. It refused to look at him again. A camp attempted to reward cooperation by reading poetry to the birds. The ravens left. The camp persisted. Brielle once got them to behave by wearing a bright green scarf and singing lullabies. It only worked on Tuesdays. The man who claimed to be a raven. You're in a candlelit inn tonight, tucked in the corner near the hearth, cradling a lukewarm mug of something vaguely herbal. The fire crackles, the wind rattles the shutters, and the old man at the next table is staring at you like he's been waiting for this moment since before you were born. You look like someone who'd understand, he says. That's never a promising opener. You nod politely, sipping cautiously. He leans in, lowering his voice. I used to be a raven. Of course he did. His name is Tobin, and no one in the inn is paying him any mind. Some roll their eyes, some chuckle. One barmaid mutters, "Here we go again." But you've listened to stranger things. And this man's coat is covered in black feathers, carefully stitched, well worn, and not entirely for show. I was part of the spy flights, he says. Carried messages over rivers and walls. Could read a battle plan from 30 paces. Never lost a scroll. Not once. You ask gently whether he means he worked with ravens or... No, he says firmly. I was one. He claims he transformed during a thunderstorm over the sea. That he flew with the Duke's winged scouts during the siege of Ellenfort. That he delivered the truce letter that ended the 12-day war. Then one day, he landed, looked into a mirror, and wasn't feathers anymore. Tonight's historical curiosity, while there's no credible record of literal bird-to-human transformation, unsurprisingly, there are scattered tales in medieval folklore of shapeshifters, bird spirits, and raven men who could move unseen and deliver messages no one else dared carry. Some say it was code for spies. Others swear it was something older, deeper. Tobin recites a poem, half in rhyme, half in memory. In wing, I carried kings' regrets. In claw, I gripped their secret debts. Through cloud and wind, through arrows hum, I soared till peace or silence come. You don't interrupt. You don't laugh. Because even if the tale is fiction, it's a beautiful one. Then comes the quirky twist. He starts naming other birds he served with. One, he says, could mimic the voice of a priest to distract guards. Another, a crow woman, once led a convoy astray by imitating the calls of battlefield scouts. He calls them the Black Circle. You realize with slow, strange clarity, this isn't just a man talking nonsense. It's a man preserving memory myth, layered over fact exaggeration, wrapped around a core of truth. Scholars today still debate whether stories like Tobin's reflect real underground networks, covert messengers who used birds as symbols and code names, or maybe in some cases, even as identities. You ask what happened to the others. Scattered, he says. One became a minstrel. One married into a spice family. One lives in a lighthouse and only speaks to gulls now. You can't tell if he's smiling or sad. A raven lands on the windowsill beside you, just like that. No noise, no flutter. It tilts its head at Tobin, then at you. Tobin nods once. Still watching, he whispers, "They always know who listens." The bird takes off into the dark. No message, no scroll, just presence. Sleep now, holding on to the edge of a tale that may be madness or memory or something else entirely. Something that flies through history with feathers dipped in secrets. Tonight's feathered legends. Tobin claims he once flew over a banquet and dropped a breadcrumb in a queen's goblet just to be cheeky. He carries a pouch of dried berries for the old instincts. No one ever sees him arrive or leave. He's just suddenly there. The last flight of the black message. The night is colder than it should be. Not the sharp kind of cold that stings your fingers, but the deep, thoughtful kind that slips into your bones and whispers, something's ending. You're standing atop a watchtower that hasn't seen action in years, its stones weathered and moss soft. Around you, lanterns flicker as the last few guards mutter about soup sleep and strange dreams. But all talk stops when the raven arrives. Not just any raven. This one wears no ribbon, no scroll tube, no inked feathers. Just a strip of black silk tied neatly around one claw. The black message, tonight's historical fact. Toward the end of the age of raven messengers, some outposts used a special signal, an undecorated black ribbon, to represent a final or irrevocable message. Often it meant surrender. Sometimes it meant truce. Always it meant the end of words and the beginning of silence. The bird lands without a sound. Even the wind seems to pause. The captain of the tower steps forward, removes the ribbon, and reads what's written inside small, sharp handwriting. No embellishment. Cease all action. Accord signed at dawn. No more blood. Let it end. Everyone exhales at once, as if they'd been holding the same breath all week. Tonight's peculiar detail. One scribe noted that ravens carrying black messages were treated differently, not by people, but by other birds. They weren't chased. They weren't challenged. It was said the sky itself understood when something final was being carried. You look around. The camp begins to change. Fires are put out, more gently. Weapons are laid aside, not in stacks, but one by one. And for the first time in a month, no one checks the gates twice. The raven, remains on the perch. You ask the captain if the bird will be sent again. He shakes his head. It's done. He can stay. And here comes the final debate among scholars. Was the black message a military invention or a ritualized superstition? Some argue it was a simple code invented during tense standoffs. Others claim the practice goes back to ancient bird cults, where black silk meant the closing of a chapter, the sealing of fate. One chronicler described a final raven release as the folding of a story's wings. You sit beside the perch. The raven glances at you unimpressed, then tucks its head under a wing and begins to sleep. No flight, no mission, just rest. It's then you realize this was the last raven message of the war, and possibly of the era. From here, messengers will carry pouches on horseback. Lantern signals will replace feathers. Ink will be trusted more than instinct. But for now, just for tonight, history pauses at a feathered edge. The quiet hum of the guard's flute drifts through the air. The night doesn't feel victorious, just still. And sometimes stillness is the rarest kind of peace. Sleep now as the stars blink overhead and the last raven curls into itself like a letter with nothing more to say. Tonight's final notes. Some claimed ravens never flew after delivering a black message. They simply chose a roost and stayed. Others believed the birds carried not just words, but a sense of finality. The raven on the tower stayed 3 more nights, then vanished. No one saw him go. The last story, Under Wings. You're back where it started, a quiet hilltop, just outside the old monastery walls. The grass is tall, the sky is clear, and the breeze smells like thyme and parchment. You sit beneath a leaning cypress, watching a lone raven glide slow circles above the bell tower. No scroll, no ribbon, just flight. And maybe that's enough. A monk, older than the roof tiles and gentler than spring bread, sits beside you with a wooden bowl of figs and a memory in his eyes. He hums a tune you don't recognize, though it feels like something you've always known. That one, he says, nodding at the bird. They say he's the last. You watch as the raven lands softly on the weathered stone ledge. No one calls him. No one commands him. He just comes. Here's your final historical fact. As political systems evolved and postal networks became standardized, the use of ravens faded into myth. Their roles were replaced by riders' clerks and ink-sealed couriers. But in rural pockets, monasteries, old forts, and quiet valleys, a few ravens were kept. Not for messages, for memory. The monk hands you a scroll tied with frayed thread. It's blank. That's what we give him now. He smiles. He carries nothing, but they still bow when he arrives. You're not sure who they are, people, animals, stories, maybe all of them. The quirky detail. This monastery celebrates Feather Day once a year. Children leave out messages tied to strings of rosemary and wait for the raven to choose one. No one reads what's picked. The paper is burned at dusk. The message, they say, goes to the wind. You ask if the raven ever flies far. Sometimes, the monk says. One year, he didn't come back for a month. When he did, his feathers smelled like sea salt and cloves. Someone was baking where he landed. You both chuckle. Then the monk stands, brushes crumbs from his robe, and nods toward the empty sky. You know, he says, we used to think they were messengers for kings. I think they were just messengers for time. You sit a while longer after he leaves. The wind picks up slightly. The raven hops once, twice, then lifts into the air. He flies without hurry, not toward any tower or castle, but across the golden field wings, slicing sunlight like ink across parchment. He leaves no message, just movement. Sleep now, under a sky once filled with silent couriers and winged secrets. Their stories still drift caught in the wind, perched on rooftops, folded into the corners of forgotten scrolls. And remember, some messages were never meant to be read, only felt. Tonight's final murmurs. One raven reportedly returned after 5 years perched on a windowsill and stayed for exactly 13 minutes before flying off again. No one knows why. A scroll was once found under a chapel stone. It simply read, "He flew true." That raven you saw today. No one feeds him, but he never leaves hungry. The fire is low now, just soft ember glow, and the gentle hiss of something ancient settling into rest. Your eyes are heavy, not from exhaustion, but from having wandered through stories older than maps, steadier than stone. You followed feathers through war camps, monasteries, markets, and secret towers. You've met those who trusted ravens with secrets, songs, warnings, and love. You've walked beside eccentric lords and quiet scribes, watched birds carry inked poems and mirrored tricks, and listened to an old man who might have once been more wing than man. And now, you're here at the edge of night. The air is cool and still, the way it always is before sleep gathers in the corners of a room. There are no scrolls left to send, no towers waiting, just silence and the soft rhythm of a memory flapping through the dusk. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it, that rush of wind as a raven passes overhead. Not in a hurry, not in alarm, just in motion. Always returning, always watching. Let it remind you that even the smallest message can travel far. That silence can carry meaning. That sometimes the most important words are never written down. They're carried in gesture, in loyalty, in the trust between sender and sky. Tonight rest with the knowledge that history is not always about kings and battles, but about strange, clever birds who once flew through forgotten skies on missions no one else dared take. So breathe deep, let go. Let the last raven fade into the night. That's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.